The wind carried ghosts across Copper Ridge. Elijah Thornton had learned to live with them. 3 winters had passed since he climbed this mountain, 3 winters since he built his cabin from pine logs in silence, 3 winters since he last spoke his own name aloud to another living soul. The isolation suited him, or perhaps it punished him. He could no longer tell the difference. His hands moved with practiced efficiency as he checked the trapline fingers numb inside worn leather gloves. The morning sun barely touched the snow, casting everything in shades of gray and blue, beautiful in the way that loneliness could be beautiful, the kind of beauty that ached in your chest and made you wonder if you deserved to witness it at all. Eli was 29 years old, though the mirror in his cabin suggested otherwise. The lines around his eyes belonged to an older man carved there by nights without sleep and days without purpose. His beard had grown thick and unkempt, more brown than the sandy color it used to be. He kept his hair long enough to tie back with a strip of leather, a habit from his cavalry days that he could not seem to break. The cavalry. Even thinking the word made his stomach clench. He moved to the next trap, finding it empty. A waste of good bait. The rabbits were smart this winter, or perhaps they simply knew better than to trust anything that looked like mercy. Eli understood. He had stopped trusting Mercy 3 years ago on a cold morning in November when Mercy had died screaming in a place called Black Creek. The memory tried to surface. He pushed it down with the same ruthless efficiency he used for everything else. Check the trap, reset the snare, move forward. Do not think, do not remember, do not let yourself feel anything at all. But the ghosts had other plans. They always came at dusk when the light turned golden and the shadows grew long. Sometimes they came in dreams so vivid he woke with their names on his lips. Other times they appeared at the edge of his vision, translucent figures standing in the tree line watching him with eyes that held no forgiveness. He had learned not to turn his head quickly. If he moved slowly enough, sometimes they would fade before he had to see their faces clearly. Sometimes. The cabin stood ahead, smoke rising from the chimney where he had left the fire banked that morning. It was a small structure, barely large enough for a man to stand upright in the center, but it kept the wind out and the warmth in. He had built it himself, every log notched and fitted by his own hands. Honest work. Clean work. The kind of work that should have brought peace. It had not brought peace. Inside, the air smelled of pine smoke and coffee gone cold. A single room held everything he owned: a narrow bed with a straw mattress, a table made from split logs, 2 chairs, though he never had visitors, a cast-iron stove that served for both cooking and heat. On the wall above his bed hung a single photograph in a wooden frame, the only decoration in the entire space. Eli set down his rifle and removed his gloves. His hands shook slightly as he reached for the photograph. A tremor, he told himself, came from the cold. He had looked at this image 1,000 times, maybe more. A woman stared back at him from the faded paper, her face serious and proud. She wore traditional Apache clothing, intricate beadwork across her chest. In her arms she held a child perhaps 2 years old with wide dark eyes that seemed to look directly through the camera and into the future. Into Eli's future. He had found the photograph in the ruins of Black Creek, half buried in ash and blood. He did not know the woman's name. He did not know if she had been the mother or an aunt or simply a neighbor caring for someone else's child. All he knew was that when the shooting started, she had been standing near the river with that child in her arms. He knew because he had seen her there. He had watched her try to run. He had done nothing to stop what happened next. His commanding officer, Captain William Hartley, had given clear orders. No survivors, no witnesses, no mercy for those who harbored enemies of the United States. The woman had not been harboring enemies. None of them had. Black Creek was a peaceful village home to families who wanted nothing more than to live quietly and raise their children away from the conflicts that raged across the territories. But Hartley had his orders, or perhaps he simply had his ambitions. Eli was no longer certain which had mattered more. The photograph slipped from his fingers and fell onto the bed. Eli sat down heavily, elbows on his knees, face in his hands. This was the worst time of day, the hours between productivity and sleep, when there was nothing to do but exist with his own thoughts. The ghosts grew stronger, then their voices clearer. He whispered in Apache words he had taught himself from an old dictionary he found in a trading post. The grammar was probably wrong, the pronunciation certainly was, but he said them anyway. I am sorry. I am sorry. I am sorry. The words changed nothing. They never did. But he said them every night, a ritual of penance that brought no absolution. Outside, the wind picked up. Eli stood and moved to the window, looking out across the valley below. The sun was setting now, painting the snow in shades of orange and pink. Beautiful. Always so damn beautiful, as if the world was mocking him with its indifference to human suffering. Then he heard it. A sound that did not belong to the wind. Distant. Muffled by snow and distance. But unmistakable. The howl of wolves. Eli grabbed his rifle without thinking, a soldier's instinct that 3 years of isolation had not erased. He moved to the door, opened it slowly, listening. The howling came again, closer now. Not the lone cry of a single animal, but the coordinated hunting call of a pack. And beneath it something else. A scream. Human. Female. Terrified. Every muscle in his body tensed. His first instinct was to close the door, to pretend he had not heard, to let whatever was happening in the valley below remain someone else's problem. He had spent 3 years avoiding exactly this kind of situation. 3 years keeping his distance from anyone who might need help, because help required interaction, and interaction required trust, and trust was something he could no longer afford. The scream came again. Eli was running before he made the conscious decision to move. His boots pounded through deep snow, rifle in one hand, the other reaching for the knife at his belt. The valley sloped sharply downward here, and he half ran, half slid through drifts that came up to his knees. The howling grew louder, more frenzied. The wolves had found their prey and were closing in for the kill. He crashed through a stand of bare aspen trees and emerged onto the bank of a frozen creek. The scene before him seemed to exist in fragments, each detail searing itself into his memory with perfect clarity. 6 wolves, gray and massive, circling a large boulder that jutted up from the snow like a broken tooth. On top of that boulder stood 2 women, young, dressed in Apache clothing that was too thin for this kind of cold. One of them was bleeding dark red, staining the snow at the base of the rock. The other stood in front of her, holding a knife that looked pitifully small against the size of the animals below. The wolves had not seen him yet. Their attention was focused entirely on the women, hackles, raised teeth bared in anticipation. One of them lunged at the rock claws scraping against stone. Eli raised his rifle and fired. The shot cracked across the valley like thunder. The lead wolf dropped instantly, a clean kill through the skull. The rest of the pack scattered, confused by the sudden attack from an unexpected direction. Eli worked the lever action, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering another round. He fired again, dropping a second wolf as it tried to flee. The remaining 4 turned toward him, reassessing the situation. One of them, larger than the others, took a step forward. Alpha. Testing him. Eli reached into his coat and pulled out a pitch-soaked torch he had brought from the cabin, a habit from his scouting days when he never traveled without fire. He struck a match against the rifle stock and lit the torch in one smooth motion. The flames leaped to life, bright orange against the blue twilight. He raised the torch and shouted a wordless roar that came from some primal place he did not know still existed inside him. The alpha wolf hesitated. In that moment of hesitation, Eli charged forward, torch held high. The animal broke and ran. The rest of the pack followed, disappearing into the tree line with their tails low. Silence fell across the valley, broken only by the crackling of the torch and the ragged sound of Eli's own breathing. He turned toward the boulder. Both women were staring at him. They looked young, perhaps 18 or 19, with long black hair and faces marked with ceremonial paint that had started to run with sweat and melting snow. Eli took a step forward, raising his free hand. The one in front still held her knife, though her hand trembled violently. The one behind her was slumped against the rock, clearly struggling to remain conscious. Eli took a step forward, raising his free hand to show he meant no harm. The woman with the knife flinched, pressing herself back against her companion. Her eyes were wide, not with gratitude, but with something far more complex. Recognition mixed with fear, mixed with something that looked almost like rage. She spoke, her voice rough from screaming, but her English perfect and precise. "Don't touch her, cavalry dog." The words hit Eli like a physical blow. He stopped moving, the torch wavering in his hand. She knew. Somehow, impossibly, she knew what he was, what he had been. The woman's eyes never left his face. She was studying him with an intensity that made him want to look away, to run, to disappear back into his cabin and pretend this encounter had never happened. But he could not move. He stood frozen in the snow while she examined him like a specimen under glass. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, but infinitely more terrible. "I know your face. You were at Black Creek." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Eli's vision blurred at the edges. Of all the ways he had imagined his past catching up to him, this had never been one of them. Not here. Not like this. Not from the mouth of a woman who should have been just another stranger in the wilderness. She continued, each word falling like stones into deep water. "You killed my mother." The wounded woman stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She looked at Eli, her gaze unfocused, struggling to understand what was happening. Then recognition sparked in those dark eyes, and Eli saw the exact moment she understood who stood before her. The terror on her face was absolute. She tried to speak, to warn her companion perhaps, but her lips were blue with cold and the words would not come. Her eyes rolled back and she slumped forward unconscious. The woman with the knife lunged forward to catch her, never taking her eyes off Eli. Her movements were protective, desperate. She managed to ease her companion down onto the rock, but the motion exposed the wound on the unconscious woman's leg. It was deep, a ragged tear that was bleeding steadily into the snow. "Help her!" The words came out strangled, caught between pride and desperation. "Or kill us both and finish what your people started." Eli looked at the bleeding woman, then at the one who was conscious, then down at his own hands. They were shaking again, but not from the cold this time. His mind was racing through calculations. The wound needed pressure, needed cleaning, needed stitching. The blood loss was severe. Hypothermia was setting in for both of them. Without treatment, the wounded woman would die, maybe within the hour. He looked up and met the eyes of the woman with the knife. She was waiting for his answer, waiting to see what kind of man he truly was. Eli did the only thing he knew how to do. He dropped his rifle in the snow at her feet. Then he removed his coat, his most valuable possession in this frozen wilderness, and held it out to her. His voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. "I can't undo what I did. But if you let her die because of your hate for me, you'll carry that weight forever." He swallowed hard, forcing himself to continue. "I know. I carry it every day." The woman stared at the coat, then at him, then down at her sister. The knife trembled in her hand. For a long moment the only sound was the wind and the labored breathing of the injured woman. Then she lowered the knife. "You save her," she said, her voice breaking on the words. "Then I kill you." Eli nodded. It seemed fair. He moved forward slowly, giving her time to change her mind, to plunge that knife into his chest if she decided that was the better choice. She did not. Instead, she stepped aside, letting him approach the wounded woman. Up close, he could see how young they both were. Girls really, though, something in their eyes suggested they had aged beyond their years in ways that had nothing to do with time. The unconscious one had delicate features and hair that fell past her shoulders in thick waves. The bleeding wound on her leg was worse than he had thought, the edges ragged where wolf teeth had torn through flesh. "What's her name?" he asked quietly, already working to tear strips from his shirt for bandages. The conscious woman hesitated, as if giving him even that small piece of information was a betrayal. Finally she answered, "Ayanna." "And yours?" A longer pause this time. "Kaya." Eli nodded, committing the names to memory. He pressed the makeshift bandage against Ayanna's wound, applying steady pressure. She did not respond, too far gone into shock to feel the pain. "My cabin is a mile north," he said. "She needs warmth, needs proper care. I have supplies there." Kaya's jaw tightened. "You want us to go with you, to trust you?" "No," Eli said honestly. "I wouldn't trust me either, but she's dying. You know it and I know it. So you have to decide what matters more, your hate for me or her life." The words hung in the frozen air between them. Kaya looked down at her sister at the blood that was already seeping through the bandage at the blue tint to her lips. When she looked back up, tears were streaming down her face, cutting tracks through the ceremonial paint. "If she dies because of you," she whispered, "I will hunt you to the ends of the earth." "I know," Eli said. He scooped Ayanna into his arms as gently as he could. She weighed almost nothing, her body limp and cold. Kaya picked up his rifle and coat, keeping both out of his reach. Smart. She moved to walk behind him, the knife still in her hand, still ready. They began the long walk back to the cabin. 3 people bound together by violence and necessity, and something that might have been fate if either of them believed in such things. The sun had set completely now. Above them the first stars were beginning to appear. A full moon rose over the ridge, pale and enormous. Eli had heard the Apache called it the wolf's moon. How fitting, he thought, that it should be shining tonight. The cabin door slammed open under Eli's boot snow scattering across the threshold. The fire had died to embers in his absence, leaving the interior cold and shadowed. He moved quickly despite the weight in his arms, carrying Ayanna to his bed and laying her down with a gentleness that seemed strange coming from hands that had held weapons for so long. Kaya entered behind him, her knife still drawn, her eyes cataloging every corner of the single room, looking for weapons, for exits, for anything that might give her an advantage if this turned from rescue to trap. Eli understood. In her position he would have done the same. "Close the door," he said without turning around. "We need to keep the heat in." She hesitated, then complied. The rifle remained in her left hand, his coat draped over her arm. She had not put it on, he noticed, would not accept even that small comfort from him. Eli knelt beside the stove and began feeding it kindling, building the fire back to life. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, strike the steel catch, the spark coax the flame. Within moments, orange light filled the room and warmth began to push back against the cold that had seeped into the walls. "There's a pot on the shelf," he said, nodding toward the corner. "Fill it with snow and set it on the stove. We need hot water." Kaya did not move. Eli looked up at her. She stood rigid near the door, the knife white-knuckled in her grip. Her face was a mask of conflicting emotions: rage, fear, desperation. And beneath it all, exhaustion so profound it seemed to radiate from her bones. "She's dying," he said quietly. "Every second we waste brings her closer to death. So either help me save her or kill me now and be done with it. But decide." The words hung between them like a challenge. Kaya's breathing came fast and shallow. For a moment Eli thought she might actually do it, might cross the room and bury that knife in his chest. Part of him almost hoped she would. At least then the waiting would be over. Instead, she set down the rifle and coat, grabbed the pot, and moved to the door. She scooped it full of clean snow from outside, then placed it on the stove with trembling hands. Eli turned his attention back to Ayanna. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and her breathing had become shallow and irregular. The bandage he had applied was already soaked through with blood. He needed to work fast. From beneath the bed he pulled out a wooden box that served as his medical kit. Not much inside. A needle and thread, a bottle of whiskey, some clean cloth, a few herbs he had learned to identify from a book on frontier medicine. It would have to be enough. He cut away the fabric around Ayanna's wound, exposing the full extent of the damage. The wolf had caught her just above the ankle teeth, tearing through muscle and possibly nicking the bone. The bleeding had slowed but not stopped. If infection set in, she would lose the leg. If he could not close the wound properly, she would bleed out before morning. "I need to stitch this," he said. "It's going to hurt. She might wake up. If she does, you'll need to hold her still." Kaya moved closer, her shadow falling across the bed. She looked down at her sister's face, and something in her expression crumpled. For just a moment the hardness fell away, and Eli saw her for what she truly was. A terrified young woman trying desperately to save the person she loved most in the world. "Will she live?" The question came out barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Eli answered honestly, "but I'll do everything I can." He poured whiskey over his hands and the needle, then began to clean the wound. The water had started to boil. He used a cloth to lift the pot and poured hot water over the torn flesh, washing away dirt and debris. Ayanna moaned, but did not wake. Threading the needle with hands steadier than he felt, Eli began to stitch. The firelight flickered across his work, casting shadows that made it difficult to see. He worked by feel as much as sight, pulling the torn edges of skin together, tying off each stitch with careful precision. Kaya watched in silence. Once, when Eli's hand slipped and he had to redo a stitch, she made a small sound in her throat. But she did not interfere, did not speak, just watched with eyes that held a universe of grief. It took nearly an hour to close the wound. By the time Eli tied off the final stitch, sweat was running down his face despite the cold. He sat back on his heels, examining his work. Not perfect? Far from it. But it would hold. It would have to. He wrapped the leg in clean bandages, then pulled a blanket over Ayanna's still form. Her breathing had evened out slightly, though she remained unconscious. Her body was fighting shock and blood loss and hypothermia all at once. The next few hours would tell whether she was strong enough to win that fight. Eli stood his knees protesting after kneeling for so long. He moved to the stove and poured hot water into 2 tin cups, adding a pinch of herbs that would help with warmth and pain. He held 1 cup out to Kaya. She stared at it like it might be poisoned. "It's just tea," he said. "Willow bark and mint. Nothing that will harm you." Still she hesitated. Finally she took the cup but did not drink, just held it, letting the warmth seep into her frozen fingers. Eli moved to the far side of the room, putting distance between them. He sank into one of the chairs at his small table, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. The adrenaline that had carried him through the rescue was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. They sat in silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and Ayanna's steady breathing. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. The storm was coming in hard now. They would be trapped here for days, maybe a week. 3 people in a space built for one, bound together by circumstances that defied all reason. Finally Kaya spoke. Her voice was low, controlled, but threaded with an anger that had not diminished. "Why did you help us?" Eli looked down at his cup. The tea had gone cold. He had forgotten to drink it. "Because I could," he said simply. "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." Kaya's jaw clenched. She set down her cup with enough force that tea sloshed over the rim. "You're a soldier. You kill people like us. That's what you do. That's what you did at Black Creek." The name fell between them like a stone into water, sending ripples through the fragile peace. Eli met her eyes. "Yes. So why save us now? Guilt you think one good deed balances out what you did?" "No," Eli said quietly. "Nothing balances that out. Nothing ever will." "Then why?" He was silent for a long moment, searching for words that might make sense of something he did not fully understand himself. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion he could not quite suppress. "Because I'm tired of watching people die." Kaya laughed, a bitter sound devoid of humor. "You're tired. My mother spent 2 years dying from what your people did to her. 2 years of pain and infection and nightmares. Every day she woke up and had to remember that her husband was dead, that her friends were dead, that the place she called home was burned to ash. And you're tired." Each word was a knife precisely placed to cause maximum damage. Eli did not flinch, did not defend himself. He simply absorbed the pain, adding it to the collection he already carried. "Tell me about her," he said softly. Kaya blinked, thrown by the request. "What?" "Your mother. Tell me about her. Not how she died, how she lived." For a moment he thought she might refuse, might tell him he had no right to know anything about the woman whose death he had failed to prevent. But something shifted in her expression. Maybe she needed to speak the words. Maybe she needed someone to hear them, even if that someone was the last person in the world who deserved to listen. "Her name was Isi," Kaya said slowly. "It means deer. She loved to run. Even when she was older, even when her joints ached, she would run through the valley every morning at sunrise. She said it made her feel young again. Eli listened without interrupting, letting the words wash over him. She taught us everything: how to track, how to hunt, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to be strong when the world wanted us to be weak. She never complained, never showed fear, even when the soldiers came and forced us to move again and again. Kaya's voice cracked. She survived the journey to the reservation, survived the hunger and the sickness that killed so many others, but she couldn't survive what happened at Black Creek. She looked at Eli with eyes full of unshed tears. She was gathering water when your people attacked. Just water. For cooking, for washing. Such a simple thing. The bullets missed her, but the soldier who came after, he used his rifle like a club, broke her ribs, punctured her lung. She lived, but she was never the same. The infection spread slowly, eating away at her from the inside. Toward the end, she couldn't even breathe without pain. Eli closed his eyes. The image formed in his mind with perfect clarity. He had seen Isi that day, had seen her by the river, had seen the soldier raise his weapon, had done nothing, had stood frozen while another human being's life was shattered beyond repair. "I remember her," he said, the words tasting like ash. "I saw what happened. I didn't stop it." Why not? The question was simple. The answer was not. "Because I was a coward," Eli said. "Because I told myself I was following orders. Because I was afraid that if I spoke up, if I tried to intervene, they would turn on me too. So I stood there, and I watched, and I did nothing." He opened his eyes and looked directly at Kaya. "There's no excuse for it, no justification. I was wrong. I've known I was wrong every day since, but knowing doesn't change anything, doesn't bring her back, doesn't heal the wounds I helped create." Kaya was crying now, silent tears that left tracks down her face. "I hate you," she whispered. "I hate everything you represent, everything you've done. I know. If Ayanna dies, I will kill you. I swear it on my mother's grave. I know that too." They stared at each other across the small room, two people connected by violence and loss, by guilt and grief, by a shared understanding that some things could never be forgiven. Then Ayanna stirred. Both of them moved at once, Kaya reaching the bed first. Ayanna's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. She looked up at her sister, then around the unfamiliar room, then finally at Eli standing in the shadows. Recognition dawned slowly. When it did, fear flooded her features. She tried to sit up, tried to scramble away, and the movement pulled at her stitches. She cried out in pain, clutching at her leg. "Don't move," Kaya said, urgently switching to Apache. Eli could not understand the words, but the meaning was clear. "Be still. You're hurt. You're safe." But Ayanna was not listening. Her eyes were locked on Eli, wide with terror. She spoke rapidly in Apache, her voice rising in panic. Kaya gripped her sister's shoulders, forcing her to focus. She spoke in soothing tones, a mix of Apache and English, trying to calm the rising hysteria. Slowly, gradually, Ayanna's breathing began to even out. The panic did not leave her eyes, but she stopped struggling. She looked at Kaya, then back at Eli, then asked a question in Apache. Her voice was small, childlike. Kaya answered, and though Eli did not understand the language, he understood the tone. Explaining, reassuring, asking for trust. Ayanna shook her head violently, spoke again. Kaya responded. They went back and forth for several minutes while Eli stood frozen, feeling like an intruder in his own home. Finally, Kaya turned to him. Her face was composed, but her eyes were red from crying. "She wants to know if you're going to kill us." Eli felt something twist in his chest. He moved slowly closer to the bed, making sure to keep his hands visible, unthreatening. He looked at Ayanna, at this young woman who had every reason to fear him, and spoke with absolute honesty. "No, I'm not going to hurt you. Either of you. I give you my word." Kaya translated. Ayanna listened, but the fear did not leave her face. She spoke again, a single question. She asks why we should believe the word of a soldier who kills women and children. The words hit like a physical blow, but Eli did not look away. "Because I'm not that soldier anymore. Because I left that life behind. because I would rather die than let anyone else suffer because of my cowardice." He paused, then added, "And because her sister is holding a knife and I gave her my rifle. If I wanted you dead, I've had a dozen chances. I chose to save you instead." Kaya translated again. Ayanna listened, her eyes searching Eli's face for any sign of deception. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy something because she nodded slowly and lay back against the pillow. She spoke one more time, her voice barely audible. Kaya's expression softened slightly. She says, "Thank you for stopping the wolves, for helping her." Eli nodded, not trusting his voice. Ayanna's eyes were already closing again, exhaustion pulling her back toward sleep. Within moments her breathing had deepened, and she was unconscious once more. Kaya stood wiping at her face with the back of her hand. She moved to the window and stared out at the darkness beyond. The storm had arrived in full force now, snow falling so thick it was impossible to see more than a few feet. "How long?" she asked. "The storm days, probably. Maybe a week." "A week," she repeated hollowly. "Trapped here with you, with the man who helped destroy my family. I'll sleep outside if you'd prefer. There's a lean-to I built for storage. It's not warm, but I can manage." Kaya turned to look at him, surprised. "You would freeze. Better than making you uncomfortable in the only shelter for miles." For the first time since they had met, something that might have been respect flickered across her face. "No," she said quietly. "You saved Ayanna's life. I won't let you die for it." She paused. "But I'm keeping the rifle and the knife, and if you make any move that I don't like, any move at all, I will put a bullet through your head." "Fair enough." Eli moved to gather some blankets from a trunk in the corner. He fashioned a makeshift bed on the floor near the stove, far enough from the bed to give Kaya space, but close enough to tend the fire through the night. As he settled down onto the hard floor, Kaya spoke again. "Why did you come here to this mountain, to this isolation?" Eli stared up at the ceiling, at the rough-hewn beams barely visible in the firelight. "Because I couldn't live with what I had become, couldn't face the man I saw in the mirror every morning. So I ran, came here to hide from the world, from other people, from myself." He laughed bitterly. "Didn't work, obviously. Can't hide from your own conscience. Do you dream about it? About Black Creek? Every night?" Silence fell between them again, but it felt different now. Less hostile, still painful, still weighted with history and hurt, but somehow more bearable. Kaya moved to sit in the chair by Ayanna's bedside. She laid the rifle across her lap within easy reach. The knife remained in her belt. She was taking no chances. "My father is Chief Dakota," she said suddenly. "When he finds out we're missing, he'll send warriors to search for us." Eli nodded. He had heard of Dakota, a powerful leader respected and feared in equal measure. "How long before he starts looking? We were supposed to reach our winter camp 2 days ago. When we don't arrive, he'll know something is wrong." She looked down at her sister. "He's already lost our mother. If he loses us too—" She did not finish the sentence, did not need to. "When the storm clears, we'll get you back to your people," Eli said. "I'll help you travel, make sure you're safe." "Why would you do that?" "Because it's the right thing to do." Kaya laughed, that same bitter sound from before. "The right thing. Is that what you tell yourself? That you're doing the right thing now, so somehow it balances out?" "No," Eli said quietly. "Nothing balances out. I told you that already. But that doesn't mean I stop trying to do better. Doesn't mean I give up and accept that I'm just a monster who deserves to suffer." He rolled onto his side, facing away from her. "I can't change the past. Can't bring back the people I failed to protect, but I can try to make sure no one else dies because I was too afraid to act. That's all I have left. The choice to do better in this moment than I did in the last." For a long time Kaya said nothing. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful. "My mother used to say that the wolf and the deer are both sacred. The wolf kills to survive and the deer dies to feed the wolf. Neither is evil. Both are necessary. But a man—" She paused. "A man has a choice. He can be the wolf or the deer or something else entirely. Something better. What did she think people should be? Human, with all that means, capable of great cruelty and great kindness. The choice is what defines us. Eli thought about that, about choices made and choices avoided, about the moment when he could have spoken up at Black Creek and chose silence instead, about the moment today when he heard screams and chose to run toward them. Different choices, different outcomes, the same man trying to become someone he could bear to be. "I'm sorry about your mother," he said into the darkness. "I know it doesn't help. I know it doesn't change anything, but I'm sorry." Kaya was quiet for so long he thought she had fallen asleep. Then her voice came soft and weary. "I know you are. I can see it in your eyes. All that guilt, all that pain. You're drowning in it." "Yes." "Good," she said. "You should drown in it. You should never forget, never find peace." "I won't." More silence. The fire crackled. The wind howled. Ayanna breathed softly in her sleep. And somewhere in that small cabin on Copper Ridge, three people bound by violence and necessity and something that might have been fate began the long, impossible process of surviving each other. Outside, the wolf's moon shone down through breaks in the storm clouds, illuminating a world buried in white. Beautiful and merciless, like everything else in this hard country. Inside, Eli lay awake and listened to Kaya keep watch, and wondered if either of them would live to see the sun rise. Morning arrived without fanfare, pale light filtering through the shuttered windows like smoke. Eli woke to find Kaya exactly where she had been when he fell asleep upright in the chair rifle across her lap, eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion, but still alert. She had not slept, had not trusted him enough to close her eyes for even a moment. He sat up slowly, making his movements obvious and unthreatening, every gesture deliberate, every action designed to show he posed no danger. Kaya watched him like a hawk watches a rabbit. "How is she?" Eli asked, nodding toward the bed. Kaya glanced at her sister. Ayanna's breathing was steady, her color better than it had been last night. The fever had not set in yet, a good sign, though not a guarantee. "She's alive," Kaya said. The words carried no gratitude, just statement of fact. Eli stood and moved to the stove building up the fire that had burned low during the night. The cabin was cold enough that his breath misted in the air. He added wood, coaxed the flames higher, then filled a pot with snow to melt for coffee. The routine actions felt strange with an audience. For 3 years he had performed these morning rituals alone, with only ghosts for company. Now 2 living, breathing people occupied his space, and their presence made everything feel foreign. The cabin seemed smaller, the air thicker, the silence louder. He ground coffee beans using the butt of his knife against a flat stone, the rhythmic scraping the only sound beyond the fire's whisper. When the water boiled, he added the grounds and let the mixture steep. The smell filled the cabin, rich and earthy. "Do you drink coffee?" he asked without turning around. A pause. Then reluctantly, "Yes." He poured 2 cups and set one on the small table within her reach, careful not to come too close. She watched him retreat before picking it up, sniffing it first as if checking for poison. Finally, she took a sip. Her eyes closed briefly. A moment of involuntary pleasure at the warmth, the taste, the simple comfort of something familiar. When she opened them again, the guard was back up. Eli drank his own coffee, standing by the window looking out at the storm. Snow fell in sheets, already piling in drifts that reached halfway up the door. The world beyond the cabin had disappeared entirely. No landmarks, no horizon, just white upon white upon white. "We're not going anywhere today," he said. "I can see that." More silence. It stretched between them like a living thing, heavy and suffocating. Ayanna stirred a small sound of discomfort. Kaya was at her side, instantly setting down the coffee and checking the bandages. Eli stayed where he was, giving them space. After a moment, Ayanna's eyes fluttered open. She looked up at her sister, confused and disoriented. Then memory returned, and with it fear. Her gaze darted to Eli standing across the room, her body tensed, ready to flee despite the injury. Kaya spoke softly in Apache, one hand on Ayanna's shoulder. The gentle pressure kept her from trying to rise. The words were soothing, explaining, reassuring. Gradually, Ayanna relaxed, though she never took her eyes off Eli. After several minutes of quiet conversation, Kaya switched to English. "She's in pain. Do you have anything that might help?" Eli moved to his medicine box and retrieved a small leather pouch. "Willow bark. Mix it with hot water. It won't take away all the pain, but it will help." He set the pouch on the table and stepped back. Kaya prepared the mixture herself, still not willing to accept anything directly from his hands. She helped Ayanna drink it, supporting her head with a tenderness that made something ache in Eli's chest. Family. This was what family looked like, what love looked like. The kind of bond he had destroyed at Black Creek when he stood by and did nothing. "She needs food," Kaya said. "Something light. Broth if you have it. I have dried meat. I can make soup." He set about the task, cutting strips of venison into small pieces, adding them to a pot with melted snow and a handful of wild onions he had stored in a basket. The work gave him something to focus on besides the tension that filled every corner of the small space. As he cooked, Ayanna watched him with wide, wary eyes. She whispered questions to Kaya in Apache. Kaya answered in the same language, but Eli caught his own name several times. They were talking about him, deciding whether to trust him or simply waiting for the right moment to kill him. He could not blame them either way. The soup took an hour to prepare properly. When it was ready, Eli ladled it into bowls and again set them on the table for Kaya to retrieve. She tasted hers first, a deliberate gesture, making sure it was safe before giving any to her sister. Ayanna ate slowly, her hands shaking with weakness. The hot broth seemed to revive her somewhat. Color returned to her cheeks. Her breathing eased. When she finished, she spoke directly to Eli for the first time. Her English was heavily accented but clear. "Thank you for the food, for my leg." Eli nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Ayanna looked at Kaya, then back at him. "My sister says you were at Black Creek, that you helped kill our people." The directness of it was almost refreshing. No dancing around the truth, just laying it bare. "Yes," Eli said. "I was there." "Did you shoot anyone?" "No, but I didn't stop the others from shooting. That makes me just as guilty." Ayanna considered this, her young face far too serious for her age. "Do you regret it?" "Every day of my life." "Regret is easy," she said quietly. "Action is hard." The wisdom in those words hit Eli like a fist. This girl, barely more than a child, understood something that had taken him 3 years to begin to grasp. "You're right," he said. "Regret is worthless without change." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded as if he had passed some kind of test. She lay back down exhausted from even that brief conversation. Kaya pulled the blanket up over her sister, then turned to Eli. "She needs rest. We should be quiet." "Agreed." The day crept by with agonizing slowness. Eli tried to occupy himself with small tasks, repairing a tear in his coat, sharpening his knife, organizing his meager supplies. But every action felt performative, done under the constant weight of Kaya's scrutiny. She never relaxed, never let her guard down. The rifle remained always within reach, the knife at her belt a constant reminder that one wrong move could end this fragile truce. By midday, the silence had become oppressive. Eli found himself wishing one of them would speak, would say anything to break the tension. But Kaya seemed content to sit in watchful stillness, and Ayanna slept fitfully, occasionally murmuring in Apache. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, Eli spoke. "How did you end up out here this far from your camp?" Kaya's eyes narrowed, suspicious. "Why do you want to know?" "Just making conversation, trying to understand." "You don't need to understand anything about us." "You're right. I don't. But we're stuck here together for days, maybe a week. Silence can drive a person mad. She considered this, weighing whether answering posed any risk. Finally she spoke, her voice carefully neutral. We were traveling to our winter camp, taking a route through the mountains to avoid difficulties. Difficulties. Soldiers, settlers, people who shoot first and ask questions later. The accusation hung in the air between them. Eli absorbed it without flinching. The wolves found you on the trail. We had stopped to rest near the frozen creek. They came out of nowhere, 6 of them hunting as a pack. Her voice tightened. Ayanna tried to climb the rocks. One of them caught her leg before she made it to the top. You were lucky I heard you. Luck, Kaya repeated bitterly. Is that what you call it, being saved by the enemy? I'm not your enemy. You were at Black Creek. That makes you my enemy. That makes you every Apache's enemy. Eli set down the knife he had been sharpening. Then why am I still alive? You've had the rifle all night. You could have shot me in my sleep. The question seemed to catch her off guard. She looked away, staring at the fire. Because Ayanna asked me not to, she said finally. She said you saved her life. That means something even if you took other lives before. She's wiser than both of us. She's naive. She still believes people can be good. And you don't. Kaya met his eyes, and in them he saw years of pain compressed into a young lifetime. I've seen too much to believe in goodness anymore. I believe in survival, in protecting what's mine, in doing whatever is necessary. That sounds lonely. Loneliness is better than trust that gets betrayed. Eli understood that philosophy all too well. It was the same one that had driven him to this mountain, to this isolation. The belief that solitude was safer than connection, that walls kept out pain as well as people. Your father, he said, changing the subject. You said he's Chief Dakota. He'll be searching for you. Kaya's expression shifted, something complicated passing across her face. Yes, when we don't arrive at the winter camp, he'll know something is wrong. How long before he starts looking? He's probably already started. My father doesn't wait when his daughters are in danger. There was pride in her voice, but also something else, something that sounded almost like fear. Eli frowned. You're afraid of him finding you. No, I'm afraid of what he'll do when he learns where we've been, who we've been with. I'll explain what happened, that I helped you. Kaya laughed, sharp and humorless. You think that will matter? You're a white soldier who was at Black Creek. If my father finds you with us, he won't ask questions. He'll assume the worst, and he'll kill you where you stand. The words should have frightened Eli, should have made him reconsider this entire situation. But instead he felt only a strange sense of acceptance. Then I'll die knowing I did one thing right. Kaya stared at him, trying to understand this man who seemed to court death with the same determination most people pursued life. Before she could respond, Ayanna spoke from the bed. Her voice was weak but clear. Sister, stop threatening him. He's trying to help. Kaya turned surprised. You should be resting. I've been listening. You're being cruel. Cruel he was at Black Creek. And he's tried to make amends ever since. I can see it in his eyes. All that pain he carries. Ayanna looked at Eli. You punish yourself more than we ever could. The observation was so accurate it took Eli's breath away. Kaya's face flushed with anger. You don't understand. You were too young to remember everything that happened. You didn't watch Mother suffer. I remember enough. I remember her telling us that hate is a poison that kills the vessel that holds it. Ayanna's voice was gentle but firm. You're letting it poison you, sister. For a moment Kaya looked as if she might argue. Then her shoulders sagged. She turned away, wiping at her eyes. I don't know how to stop hating, she whispered. Eli spoke quietly. You don't have to stop. Not for me. Your hate is justified. I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. Then what do you ask for? Nothing. I expect nothing. I'm just trying to help you survive. After that you can hate me all you want. You can kill me if that's what you need. But let me get your sister well first. Let me do this one thing right." The honesty in his words seemed to disarm Kaya. She looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. Confusion, frustration, and underneath it all the faintest glimmer of something that might have been understanding. "You're a strange man, Elijah Thornton. Most people just call me Eli. I'll call you what you are: soldier, killer, debt owed." But her voice had lost some of its edge. The second night fell with the same brutal cold as the first. The storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, the wind had grown stronger, howling around the cabin like something alive and hungry. Eli prepared a simple dinner of beans and cornbread. They ate in near silence, the only sound the scrape of spoons against tin plates. But it was a different kind of silence now, less hostile. Still tense, but with the sharp edges worn down by hours of forced proximity. After eating, Ayanna asked if she could sit up. Kaya helped her into the chair, propping her injured leg carefully. She looked around the cabin with undisguised curiosity. "You live here alone?" she asked Eli. "For 3 years. That's a long time to be lonely." "I chose it." "Why?" Eli hesitated, then decided she deserved honesty. "Because I couldn't stand being around people anymore. Couldn't stand seeing families and children and normal life when I knew what I had done. So I left. Came here where I wouldn't hurt anyone else." Ayanna nodded slowly. "But you were still hurting yourself." "Yes." "That's not atonement. That's just a different kind of dying." Her words echoed in the small space, profound and undeniable. Kaya was watching him again, but her expression had changed. The pure hatred had faded, replaced by something more complex. She saw him now not just as the soldier at Black Creek, but as a man who had been broken by what he had done. Still guilty, still responsible, but human. As the night deepened, they settled into an uneasy routine. Kaya took the chair again, though this time exhaustion was winning its battle against vigilance. Her eyes kept closing, her head nodding forward before she jerked herself awake. "You can sleep," Eli said from his place on the floor. "I'm not going anywhere, and even if I tried, you'd wake up before I reached the door." She wanted to refuse. He could see the stubborn pride warring with bone-deep weariness. Finally, necessity won. "If you move from that spot," she said, "I'll know. I believe you." She allowed herself to relax just slightly. Within minutes, her breathing had evened out into sleep. The rifle slipped from her fingers. Eli stood quietly and draped a blanket over her, careful not to wake her. For the first time since they had arrived, he was alone with his thoughts. He sat by the window and looked out at the storm, at the endless white that had swallowed the world. 3 people trapped together by circumstance, 2 of them the daughters of the very people he had helped brutalize. One of them the man who had failed them all. What were the odds? What cruel twist of fate had brought them to his door? Or perhaps it was not fate at all. Perhaps it was something else. Judgment, reckoning, the universe's way of forcing him to face what he had spent 3 years running from. He thought about what Ayanna had said, about atonement versus dying. She was right, of course. Hiding on this mountain was not penance. It was cowardice dressed up as remorse. Real atonement required action, required risk, required stepping back into the world he had fled. Outside, through a break in the clouds, the moon emerged, full and bright and merciless, the wolf's moon watching over a cabin where predator and prey tried to coexist. Eli wondered which one he was. He wondered if perhaps he was both. The third day began with Ayanna's laughter. The sound was so unexpected, so out of place in the tense atmosphere of the cabin, that both Eli and Kaya froze. Ayanna sat propped against the wall, blankets wrapped around her shoulders, watching a small spider make its way across the ceiling beam. Her face was lit with genuine amusement as the tiny creature navigated the rough wood. "Look," she said, pointing upward. "He's lost, going in circles." Kaya moved to stand beside her sister, following her gaze. Despite herself, the corner of her mouth twitched. "Foolish spider. Should have stayed hidden. Maybe he got lonely. Came out looking for company." The words hung in the air, their double meaning impossible to ignore. Eli, standing by the stove preparing coffee, felt the weight of that observation settle over him. A lonely creature emerging from hiding. The parallel was too obvious to miss. Ayanna looked at him and smiled, a small thing, but genuine. The first smile anyone had directed at him in 3 years. Something in Eli's chest cracked open. Kaya noticed the exchange and her expression tightened, but she said nothing. The hostility that had radiated from her over the past 2 days had begun to shift into something more complicated. Not forgiveness, not even acceptance, but a grudging acknowledgement that Eli was not the monster she had built him up to be in her mind. He was just a man, broken and guilty and trying however inadequately to be better. "How's the leg?" Eli asked, keeping his voice neutral. Ayanna glanced down at the bandaged wound. "It hurts, but less than yesterday. I think your stitches are holding." "Let me check it. Make sure there's no infection." He moved forward slowly, giving both women time to object. When neither did, he knelt beside the bed and carefully unwrapped the bandages. The wound looked clean, the edges pink but not inflamed. No smell of rot, no sign of fever. The stitches had held perfectly. Relief flooded through him. She would keep the leg, would walk again, would survive. "It's healing well," he said, beginning to rewrap the bandage. "Another few days and you should be able to put some weight on it." "Thank you," Ayanna said softly, "for taking care of me. I know it must be strange having us here." Strange did not begin to cover it. Surreal, impossible, like living inside a fever dream where past and present collided in ways that made no logical sense. "You're welcome," was all he managed to say. As he finished securing the bandage, his hand accidentally brushed against Kaya's. She had leaned in to help support Ayanna's leg, and for just a moment their skin made contact. The touch was brief, innocent, but it sent a jolt through both of them. Kaya jerked her hand back as if burned. Eli did the same, standing abruptly and putting distance between them. They did not look at each other, did not acknowledge what had just happened. But something had shifted. The day unfolded with a strange new rhythm. The storm outside continued its relentless assault, but inside the cabin the atmosphere had begun to thaw. Not warmth exactly, more like the first crack in river ice at the end of winter. Still frozen, still dangerous, but with the suggestion that spring might eventually come. Ayanna proved to be remarkably talkative once she felt strong enough to sit up for longer periods. She asked questions about everything: how long Eli had lived here, where his supplies came from, what he did to pass the time, whether he had ever seen a mountain lion up close. Eli answered each question honestly, grateful for the distraction from his own thoughts. Kaya listened in silence, her eyes tracking every word, every gesture, still searching for signs of deception or danger. "Don't you get lonely?" Ayanna asked at one point. "Living all alone up here?" Eli considered the question while pouring melted snow into the coffee pot. "Loneliness is relative. You can be lonely in a crowded room if you're disconnected from the people around you. And you can be at peace in solitude if you're at peace with yourself." "And are you at peace with yourself?" "No. But that's not because I'm alone. That's because of what I did before I came here." Ayanna nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "My mother used to say that running from your shadow only means you're letting it chase you. Better to turn around and face it." "Your mother was wise." "She was." Ayanna's voice grew softer. "I miss her every day." Kaya, who had been standing by the window, turned sharply. "Ayanna, don't. Don't talk about her, pretend she never existed. Don't share pieces of her with him. He doesn't deserve to know about her." Ayanna's eyes flashed with unexpected defiance. "Maybe not, but maybe I need to talk about her. Maybe keeping her locked inside hurts more than sharing her memory." The sisters stared at each other, a silent battle of wills playing out across the small cabin. Finally Kaya looked away, her shoulders sagging in defeat. "Tell him whatever you want," she said quietly. "I can't stop you." But she did not leave the room. Despite her words, despite her anger, she stayed and listened as Ayanna began to speak about their mother, about Isi's strength and kindness, her laugh that sounded like water over stones, her ability to find beauty, even in the harshest circumstances. Eli listened without interrupting, absorbing every detail, every memory. He owed these women that much. The least he could do was bear witness to the life he had helped destroy. By the fourth day, a strange domesticity had settled over the cabin. They moved around each other with increasing familiarity, learning to navigate the small space without constant collision. Eli cooked. Kaya tended to her sister. Ayanna entertained them both with stories and observations that seemed far too insightful for someone her age. The rifle no longer lived in Kaya's lap. She still kept it close, still watched Eli with wariness, but the constant threat of violence had diminished. They were not friends, were nowhere close to that. But they were no longer purely enemies either. They existed in some gray space in between, bound together by necessity, and the slow realization that people were rarely as simple as the categories we tried to force them into. On the evening of the fourth day after Ayanna had fallen asleep, Eli found himself alone with Kaya, for the first time since that first tense night. She sat at the table using his knife to carve something from a piece of wood she had found. Her movements were precise, practiced. An artist's hands. "What are you making?" Eli asked from his position by the fire. She did not look up. "A bird, a jay. My mother used to collect them, little wooden carvings that people would give her." "You're very skilled." "I've had practice. Winters are long on the reservation. You find ways to fill the time." Eli watched the shavings fall, curling and delicate. "May I ask you something?" Kaya's hands stilled. "You can ask. I may not answer." "That day at Black Creek, were you there?" The question hung between them, dangerous as a loaded gun. Kaya's grip on the knife tightened until her knuckles went white. "Yes," she said finally. "I was there. I don't remember seeing you. I was hiding, in the root cellar with Ayanna. My mother pushed us inside and covered the door with a blanket when the shooting started." Her voice had gone flat, emotionless. The only way to speak of trauma too large to process. "We could hear everything, every gunshot, every scream. We stayed there for hours after it went silent, too terrified to come out." Eli closed his eyes. The weight of it pressed down on him like a physical thing. "When we finally opened the door," Kaya continued, "the village was destroyed, bodies everywhere. My father, we found him by the river. He had tried to fight back, tried to protect the others. They shot him 11 times. I'm so sorry. Sorry." She tested the word like something unfamiliar. "Everyone is always sorry. The soldiers who did it were just following orders. The government officials were just doing their jobs. Everyone has excuses. Everyone is sorry. But sorry doesn't bring back the dead. No, it doesn't. Then why say it? Why offer empty words when we both know they change nothing?" Eli met her eyes across the dimly lit room. "Because the words aren't for you, they're for me. Because I need you to know that what happened matters, that your pain matters, that I acknowledge what was done and wish with everything in me that it had been different." Kaya studied him for a long moment. Then she went back to carving, her movements more aggressive now, angry. "You want absolution," she said. "You want me to tell you it's okay, that you can stop feeling guilty. But I won't give you that. I can't." "I know, I'm not asking for it." "Then what are you asking for?" "Nothing. I'm asking for nothing. I'm just trying to be honest, trying to give you the truth even if the truth is ugly." Kaya made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. "The truth is always ugly. Pretty lies are easier. But lies don't heal anything. Neither does truth." They sat in silence after that, the only sounds the crackling fire and the whisper of Kaya's knife against wood. Outside, the storm had finally begun to ease. The wind no longer howled. The snow fell more gently, almost peaceful. Time passed. An hour, maybe more. Eli added wood to the fire. Kaya finished her carving and set it on the table, a small wooden jay with wings spread in flight. "It's beautiful," Eli said. "It's a shadow of what my mother could do. She had real talent. Mine is just adequate." "You're too hard on yourself." And you're not hard enough on yourself." Eli smiled, despite everything. "Probably true." Kaya picked up the carving and turned it over in her hands, examining it from every angle. "Do you know what my mother's name meant, Easy? It means deer in our language." "Your sister mentioned that. Do you know why she was called that?" Eli shook his head. "Because when she was born, a deer walked right up to the midwife's tent, just stood there watching until the baby was born. Then it turned and walked away. The elders said it was a sign that my mother would be graceful and swift and impossible to catch unless she chose to stop running." Kaya's voice had grown soft, almost dreamy with memory. "She chose to stop running at Black Creek, chose to stay and protect her home instead of fleeing. And it killed her. She was brave." Bravery and stupidity look the same from certain angles. Courage is doing what's right even when it might cost everything. Your mother had that. Kaya looked at him, then really looked at him, and something in her expression shifted. "So do you, I think. In your own broken way." The words were not forgiveness, but they were something, an acknowledgement, a recognition that he was trying, however inadequately, to be better than he had been. It was more than Eli had expected, more than he deserved. "Tell me about your father," he said, needing to change the subject before the emotion became too much. "Chief Dakota, what kind of man is he?" Kaya's expression clouded. "Complicated, strong, unbending as iron. He loved my mother more than anything in this world. When she died, something in him died too. He became harder, angrier, more willing to fight than to negotiate. He'll be worried about you. He'll be furious. We weren't supposed to be traveling alone. He wanted us to wait for an escort to the winter camp, but Ayanna and I—" She trailed off, something guarded entering her eyes. "You what?" Kaya hesitated, clearly debating how much to reveal. When she spoke again, her voice was careful, measured. "We had our reasons for leaving when we did. Private reasons." Eli recognized a boundary when he saw one. He did not push. "When the storm clears, I'll help you get back to your people. Make sure you arrive safely." "And then what?" "You think my father will thank you for returning his daughters? You're a white soldier. He'll kill you on sight." "Maybe, but at least you'll be safe." Kaya shook her head, something like frustration crossing her face. "You have a death wish. You know that—" "Not a death wish, just an acceptance. If I die trying to do the right thing, that's a better end than I deserve." "You're an idiot." "Probably." Despite herself, despite everything, Kaya smiled. It was brief, barely there, but unmistakable. The first real smile she had given him. In that moment, something passed between them. An understanding. A connection that transcended the violence and pain that had brought them together. They were still on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide, still separated by history and blood and wounds too deep to ever fully heal. But they were also just two people sitting in a warm cabin while snow fell outside, two people trying to survive, trying to find some small piece of humanity in a world that seemed designed to strip it away. Kaya stood gathering the wood shavings from her carving. "I should sleep. Ayanna will need me tomorrow." "Take the bed tonight. I'll watch over her." "You watched last night. And you watched the night before. We can take turns." She wanted to argue. He could see it in the set of her jaw, the tension in her shoulders, but exhaustion won out over pride. "Fine. But if anything happens to her, I know. You'll kill me. I'm starting to think that's your answer to everything." "It usually works." She moved to the bed and lay down beside her sister, wrapping an arm protectively around Ayanna, even in sleep. Eli watched them for a moment. These two young women who had survived so much, who carried so much pain, and still somehow found reasons to laugh, to hope to keep going. He settled into the chair Kaya had vacated and stared into the fire. The flames danced and flickered, casting shadows on the walls. In those shadows he could almost see the ghosts that usually haunted him. But tonight they seemed quieter, less accusing. Perhaps they were giving him permission to try, to be better, to take this chance at redemption and actually do something with it. Or perhaps he was just exhausted and seeing things that were not there. Either way, he sat and kept watch while two Apache women slept in his bed and the storm outside finally began to break. By morning, the snow had stopped. The world beyond the cabin gleamed white and pristine under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Beautiful, peaceful, deceptive in its tranquility. Because Eli knew what morning would bring. The trail would be passable soon, and when it was, decisions would have to be made. About where Kaya and Ayanna would go. About what Eli would do. About how this strange, impossible interlude would end. But for now, for just a few more hours, they existed in this suspended moment. Safe, warm, alive. And that, Eli thought as he watched the sunrise paint the snow in shades of gold and pink, was enough. For now, it was enough. The sixth day dawned clear and cold, the kind of morning that felt like the world had been scrubbed clean. Eli stood outside the cabin, his breath misting in the air, surveying the landscape. The snow had stopped completely, leaving behind drifts that sparkled like crushed diamonds under the early sun. The trails would be passable by afternoon, maybe sooner. Inside, he could hear the soft murmur of voices as the sisters talked, their Apache flowing like water, musical and incomprehensible to his ears. He had grown accustomed to the sound over the past days, had even started to find it comforting in a strange way. The door opened behind him. Kaya emerged, wrapped in one of his extra blankets against the cold. She stood beside him, not quite close, but not as distant as she would have been days ago. "The storm has passed," she said. "Yes. We can leave soon. Ayanna's leg is strong enough for travel." "It will have to be. We've imposed on you long enough." Imposed. As if their presence had been a choice. As if he had not been the one to insist they stay, to care for them, to keep them alive. "You haven't imposed," Eli said quietly. "You've been... I'm glad you were here. Glad I could help." Kaya looked at him sidelong, trying to read the truth in his face. "You're a strange man, Eli Thornton. Most people would have been counting the hours until we left. I'm not most people. No, you're not." They stood in silence, watching the sun climb higher. A hawk circled overhead, dark against the blue sky. Hunting. Always hunting. "Where will you go?" Eli asked. "When you leave here?" Kaya was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was tight with tension. "That's complicated." "How so?" She wrapped the blanket tighter around herself. "Ayanna and I, we weren't just traveling to the winter camp. We were running from something." Eli turned to face her fully. "From what?" Kaya met his eyes, and in them he saw fear. Real, genuine fear that had nothing to do with him or Black Creek or any of the pain between them. From a war that's coming. A war that will destroy everything. Before Eli could ask what she meant, Ayanna appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch Eli had fashioned from a tree branch. Her face was pale but determined. "Sister," she said in English, "we have to tell him. He deserves to know." "Ayanna, no, it's not safe. He saved my life, our lives. If we're asking him to help us get back, he should know what he's walking into." Kaya looked torn, caught between the instinct to protect their secrets and the recognition that Ayanna was right. Finally she sighed, a sound of defeat. "Come inside. This isn't a conversation for the cold." They gathered around the small table, the three of them forming an unlikely triangle. Ayanna sat with her injured leg propped on a second chair. Kaya remained standing, too agitated to sit still. Eli waited, sensing that whatever they were about to tell him would change everything. "A month ago," Kaya began, her voice low, "Ayanna and I were out hunting. We went further than we should have into the mountains north of our main camp. We found a cave. We thought it might be a good place to shelter if the weather turned." She paused, her hands clenching and unclenching at her sides. "Inside that cave, we found weapons, crates and crates of them, rifles, ammunition, dynamite, enough to arm 100 men, maybe more. Eli felt something cold settle in his stomach. Apache weapons. That's what we thought at first, that our father had been stockpiling them preparing for a fight. But then we looked closer. Ayanna leaned forward, her voice urgent. The crates had markings on them. United States Army. Property of Fort Benton. The cold in Eli's stomach turned to ice. You're saying someone from the fort is supplying weapons to your tribe? Not to our tribe, Kaya corrected. To my father specifically. And he doesn't know where they're really coming from. He thinks they're from sympathetic traders, people who believe in our cause. But they're not. No, someone is setting him up, giving him weapons, encouraging him to fight so that when the violence starts, the army will have justification to wipe out our people completely. Eli stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. His mind was racing, connecting pieces he wished did not fit together so perfectly. Fort Benton, he said slowly. Who's the commanding officer there now? Kaya and Ayanna exchanged glances. We don't know. We never got close enough to find out. But Eli knew. Even before he confirmed it, he knew with a certainty that made his blood run cold. Captain William Hartley, he said. It has to be. You know him. He was my commanding officer at Black Creek. Eli began to pace the small cabin, suddenly feeling suffocating. He gave the order to attack, said we were eliminating a threat. But there was no threat, just families, children, people trying to live in peace. Why would he do that? Because Hartley doesn't care about military objectives. He cares about money, about advancement, about using his position to enrich himself. Eli stopped pacing and looked at the sisters. There's a railroad company that wants to build through Apache territory. They've been trying to buy the land for years, but your people won't sell. If there's a war, if the Apache are driven out or destroyed, that land becomes available. The railroad gets what it wants, and whoever facilitates that gets paid. Handsomely. The pieces were falling into place now, a pattern so obvious he could not believe he had not seen it before. Hartley had not just stumbled into a massacre at Black Creek. He had orchestrated it, had probably been paid for it, and now he was doing it again on a larger scale. Kaya's face had gone pale. We tried to tell our father. We brought back one of the crate lids as proof, but he wouldn't listen. He said we were being paranoid, that we'd been influenced by too much contact with white settlers. He's so hungry for a fight after what happened to our mother, he can't see that he's being manipulated. So you ran, Eli said. We were going to Fort Benton ourselves. We thought if we could find proof documentation, something concrete that showed the conspiracy, we could bring it back to our father. Make him see the truth before it's too late. And the wolves found you before you got there. Ayanna nodded. We thought we were being so careful. But we were foolish. 2 girls alone in the wilderness thinking we could stop a war. You're not foolish, Eli said firmly. You're brave. Braver than most soldiers I've known. He moved to the window, staring out at the mountains. His mind was working through possibilities, calculating risks. What Kaya and Ayanna were describing was treason, conspiracy. If Hartley was behind this, and if Eli could prove it, it would not only save the Apache from a manufactured war, it would bring down a man who had used his uniform as cover for murder and greed. It would be dangerous, possibly suicidal. Walking into Fort Benton and accusing the commanding officer of treason was a good way to end up dead in a ditch. But it was also the right thing to do, the only thing to do. Eli turned back to face the sisters. I'll help you. I'll take you to Fort Benton. We'll find the proof you need. Kaya shook her head immediately. No, absolutely not. This isn't your fight. Yes, it is. Hartley was my commanding officer. I followed his orders at Black Creek. That makes me complicit in whatever he's planning now. If I can stop him, I have to try. You'll be killed. The moment you set foot in that fort, someone will recognize you. A deserter walking into an army installation, they'll hang you. Maybe, but I was a scout for 3 years. I know how to get in and out of places without being seen, and I know Hartley, know how he thinks. That gives us an advantage. Ayanna reached across the table and took Eli's hand. The gesture was so unexpected, so trusting that it nearly broke him. "Why would you do this?" she asked softly. "Risk your life for people you don't know, for a tribe you helped hurt." Eli looked down at her small hand in his larger one. "Because your sister was right. Regret without action is just another kind of dying. I've been dying on this mountain for 3 years. Maybe it's time I started living again, even if it's just long enough to do one thing right." Kaya closed her eyes, a muscle working in her jaw. When she opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "You really are an idiot," she said, but there was no heat in it. "So I've been told." She crossed her arms, thinking. "If we do this, we do it my way. We don't walk into Fort Benton like fools. We scout it first. We plan. We find the evidence without getting caught. And if it looks too dangerous, we abort." "Agreed. Agreed. And if we survive this, if we actually manage to stop this war, you and I are even. No more debt, no more guilt. You go your way, I go mine." It should have been what Eli wanted. Absolution. Release from the weight he had been carrying. But hearing Kaya say it, hearing her so calmly discuss a future where they would part ways and never see each other again, felt wrong somehow. "If that's what you want," he said, "it's what I want." But the way she would not meet his eyes suggested otherwise. They spent the rest of the day preparing for the journey. Eli gathered supplies, dried meat, hard bread, coffee, ammunition. He fashioned a better crutch for Ayanna, one that would be more stable on rough terrain. Kaya checked and rechecked their gear, her movements efficient and precise. As evening approached, Eli pulled out a map he kept in a tin box beneath the floorboards. He spread it across the table, tracing routes with his finger. "Fort Benton is here, about 40 miles northeast. The direct route would take us through open country to exposed. We'll need to go the long way through the mountain passes. It'll add 2 days to the journey, but we're less likely to be spotted." Kaya studied the map, her finger following the terrain. "What about here?" She pointed to a narrow valley. "Could we use this?" "Too risky. It floods in spring. Even now with the snow melt it could be treacherous. But it would save us a day. And potentially kill us all if we get caught in a flash flood." She frowned but did not argue. Ayanna leaned in, examining the map with interest. "How do you know all this? The terrain, the routes?" "I scouted this area for 2 years before Black Creek. Hartley had me mapping every pass, every water source, every defensible position. He was planning even then. I just didn't understand what I was helping him plan." The bitterness in his voice was impossible to hide. Night fell their last in the cabin. Tomorrow they would leave at first light, beginning a journey that would either save hundreds of lives or end their own. The weight of it pressed down on all of them. Eli built up the fire one last time, making sure it would burn hot through the night. Ayanna was already asleep, exhausted from the day's activity. Kaya sat by the window, staring out at the darkness. "Can't sleep?" Eli asked quietly. "Too much to think about." He moved to stand beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "We don't have to do this. I could take you back to your father. Let him know about the weapons. He might listen if I'm the one telling him." "He won't. He'll kill you before you finish your first sentence. And even if he didn't, he wouldn't believe you. He wants to fight too badly. The weapons just gave him an excuse." "What if we're wrong? What if the weapons are legitimate and we're seeing a conspiracy that doesn't exist?" Kaya turned to look at him. "Do you believe that?" "No. Neither do I. I know my father. I know he's being manipulated. And I know that if we don't stop this, hundreds of people will die. Apache and white alike. Women, children, families who just want to live in peace." Like your mother wanted, Eli thought, but did not say. "You could have told me this from the beginning," he said instead. "The first night when I asked why you were out here. Why didn't you?" "Because I didn't trust you. Because for all I knew, you were part of Hartley's plan. Because trusting a white soldier with the survival of my people seemed like the fastest way to get them all killed. And now—" She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Now I think maybe you're the only person who can help us, because you understand what Hartley is, what he's capable of, and because you have nothing left to lose. Neither do you. No. But I have Ayanna to protect. That's something. That's everything. They stood in silence side by side, watching the moon rise through the window. The same moon that had been full when they first met, when Eli had pulled Ayanna from the jaws of wolves and Kaya had recognized him as the soldier from Black Creek. 6 days ago. It felt like a lifetime. "I'm afraid," Kaya said suddenly, "of what we're about to do. Of failing. Of getting us all killed for nothing." It was the first time she had admitted to fear, the first crack in her armor of strength and determination. Eli understood how much courage it took to speak those words aloud. "Fear is good," he said. "Fear keeps you alert, keeps you careful. It's when you stop being afraid that you make mistakes. You sound like my mother. She sounds like she was a remarkable woman." She was. Kaya's voice broke slightly. She would have hated what's about to happen. The violence, the war. She always said there had to be another way, that fighting only led to more fighting. She was right. Then why does it keep happening? Why can't people just stop? Eli had no answer for that. It was a question he had asked himself 1,000 times, lying awake in this cabin, haunted by the faces of those he had failed to save. Instead of answering, he did something he had not planned, something that surprised him as much as it did her. He reached out and took her hand. She stiffened at first, her instinct to pull away. But she did not. Instead, she let her fingers intertwine with his, holding on, like a drowning person holds on to driftwood. They stood like that for a long time. Two people from opposite sides of an impossible divide, connected by shared grief and shared purpose, and something else. Something neither of them was ready to name. Finally, Kaya pulled her hand away, but gently, not in rejection, but in self-preservation. "We should sleep," she said. "Tomorrow will be difficult." "Yes." She moved toward the bed where Ayanna slept. But at the last moment she turned back. "Eli." "Yes. Thank you. For believing us. For helping us. For—" she struggled to find the words. "For being better than you were." It was not forgiveness, but it was something close, an acknowledgement that people could change, that the man standing before her now was not the same man who had stood silent at Black Creek. "I'm trying," Eli said. "I know. That's why I'm trusting you." She lay down beside her sister and closed her eyes. Within minutes her breathing had evened into sleep. Eli remained by the window, watching over them both. Tomorrow they would leave the safety of this cabin and venture into danger. Tomorrow they would try to stop a war and probably die in the attempt. But tonight, they were safe. Tonight, they were together. And tomorrow, Eli thought as he finally allowed himself to close his eyes, tomorrow he would have the chance to be the man he should have been 3 years ago. The chance to do what was right, no matter the cost. The wolf's moon shone down on the cabin one last time, bearing witness to 3 people about to step into the fire. And in the morning, when they emerged into the cold light of day, everything would change. Dawn broke over the mountains like a wound, red and raw against the horizon. Eli had been awake for hours, unable to sleep with the weight of what lay ahead pressing down on his chest. He stood outside the cabin one last time, committing the place to memory. 3 years of isolation, 3 years of running from himself, all of it ending today, one way or another. The door opened. Kaya emerged fully dressed, her hair braided back for travel. She had the rifle slung across her shoulder and determination written into every line of her face. "Ayanna is ready," she said. "We should go while the morning is still cold. The snow will be firmer, easier to travel on." Eli nodded and went inside to gather the last of their supplies. Ayanna sat on the edge of the bed, testing her weight on her injured leg. She smiled when she saw him, that same genuine warmth that had begun to thaw something frozen inside him over the past days. "I can walk," she announced proudly. "It hurts, but I can manage." "We'll take it slow. There's no rush." Yes, there is, Kaya said from the doorway. Every day we waste is another day my father moves closer to war. She was right, of course, but Eli could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes kept darting to her sister. Kaya was terrified that this journey would be too much for Ayanna, that the injury would reopen or infection would set in. But she would never admit it aloud. They set out as the sun climbed higher, 3 figures moving through a landscape of white and shadow. Eli led breaking trail through the snow. Ayanna came next, using her crutch to navigate the uneven terrain. Kaya brought up the rear, rifle-ready eyes constantly scanning for threats. The first few hours passed in near silence, each of them conserving energy for the long journey ahead. The mountain trail was treacherous, narrow paths along cliff faces where one wrong step could mean a fatal fall. But Eli knew these routes intimately, had mapped them during his years as a scout. He guided them with confidence born of familiarity. By midday they had descended from the highest peaks into a valley thick with pine trees. The snow was less deep here, the traveling easier. They stopped to rest beside a frozen stream, eating dried meat and hard bread in silence. Ayanna broke the quiet. How far to Fort Benton? 2 days if we make good time, 3 if we're careful. We should be careful, Kaya said. Getting there alive is more important than getting there fast. As they prepared to move on, Eli heard something that made him freeze. Voices. Distant, but drawing closer. Male voices speaking English with the rough accent of frontier traders or trappers. "Hide," he whispered urgently. "Now!" Kaya reacted instantly, pulling Ayanna behind a cluster of boulders. Eli positioned himself where he could see the trail without being easily spotted. His hand went to the knife at his belt. The rifle was with Kaya, and he did not want to call out for it and give away their position. 4 men emerged from the tree line leading pack horses loaded with furs. They were rough-looking characters, the kind who made their living in the wilderness and asked no questions about where their goods came from or where they were going. One of them stopped, raising his hand to halt the others. "You smell that," he said. "Smoke, fresh smoke." "Could be from the hermit's cabin up on Copper Ridge," another replied. "Crazy bastard who lives up there alone. Let's check it out. Maybe he's got coffee or whiskey." Eli's mind raced. These men were heading toward his cabin. They would find evidence of recent habitation of more than one person living there. And if they started asking questions, started spreading word that the hermit had company, it could reach the wrong ears, could compromise everything. He stepped out onto the trail, making himself visible. The 4 men spun toward him, hands going to weapons. Eli raised his hands, showing he meant no threat. "Gentlemen," he said calmly, "I'm the hermit you're talking about, and I'd appreciate it if you'd keep moving. I don't take kindly to visitors." The leader, a big man with a scar across his jaw, looked Eli up and down. "You're a long way from your cabin, hermit. What brings you down to the valley?" "Checking my trap line, same as every month." "In the middle of winter, after a storm like that, exactly when the pelts are best." The man's eyes narrowed, suspicious. He took a step closer, and Eli could smell the whiskey on his breath even from several feet away. "You look familiar," the man said slowly. "I know you from somewhere." Eli's blood ran cold. Had this man been in the army? Seen him before Black Creek? One of the many soldiers who had rotated through the frontier posts? "I've got one of those faces," Eli said, keeping his voice light. "People always think they know me." "No, I definitely know you. You were a scout for that bastard Hartley at Fort Benton." The other men had spread out now, forming a loose semicircle. Their hands rested on their weapons. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. "That was a long time ago," Eli said. "I'm not that person anymore." "Deserter, then. That's a hanging offense." The scarred man grinned, showing yellow teeth. "Army pays good money for deserters, especially ones who know things about officers like Hartley." Behind the boulders, Eli knew Kaya was listening to every word, knew she had the rifle trained on these men waiting for his signal. But he could not let her shoot. Gunfire would echo through the valley, would alert anyone within miles, and these men might have friends nearby, a larger camp that would come looking if they did not return. I don't know anything worth paying for, Eli said carefully. Been out of the army for years. Whatever Hartley's doing now, I'm not part of it. Still, reward's a reward. Boys, tie him up. We'll take him to Fort Benton, see what he's worth. The men moved forward. Eli had seconds to make a decision. Fight and risk everything, or surrender and hope for a chance to escape later. Then Kaya stepped out from behind the boulders, rifle raised, and aimed directly at the scarred man's head. "Nobody touches him," she said, her voice deadly calm. The men froze, shocked by the sudden appearance of an Apache woman with a gun. Their hands went for their own weapons, but Kaya's voice stopped them. "The first one who draws gets a bullet through the skull. The second gets one through the heart. I might not get all 4 of you, but I guarantee I get 2. So you need to ask yourselves who wants to be first." The scarred man's eyes widened as he recognized what he was seeing. "You're Apache. What's an Apache woman doing protecting a white deserter? That's none of your concern. What should concern you is staying alive for the next 5 minutes." "There's 4 of us and 1 of you girl." "2 of us," Ayanna said, emerging from cover with Eli's pistol in her hands. She moved awkwardly on her injured leg, but the gun was steady. "And unlike my sister, I won't hesitate. I've killed men before." It was a lie, Eli knew, but it was a convincing one. Ayanna's eyes were hard, her voice cold. She looked like someone who had seen death and would not flinch from dealing it out. The standoff stretched for long seconds. Finally, the scarred man raised his hands slowly. "Easy now. No need for shooting. We'll just be on our way." "Leave your weapons," Kaya ordered. "All of them. Guns, knives, everything." "Like hell we will. That leaves us defenseless against wolves, bears, bandits." "Not my problem. You have 10 seconds to comply or I start shooting." 10, 9, 8. The men exchanged glances, calculating odds. At 3, they began unbuckling gun belts and dropping knives into the snow. When they were disarmed, Kaya gestured with the rifle. "Now go. Back the way you came. And if I see any of you again, if I even hear that you've been asking questions about us, I'll hunt you down and make sure you die slow." The threat should have sounded absurd coming from a young woman, but there was something in Kaya's voice, something in the set of her jaw that made it utterly believable. The men backed away, then turned and hurried up the trail, casting fearful glances over their shoulders. Within minutes they had disappeared into the trees. Eli let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. That was too close. "They'll talk," Kaya said, already moving to gather the abandoned weapons. "They'll reach the fort in a day, maybe less if they ride hard. They'll tell Hartley you're alive, that you're with Apache women. He'll know we're coming. Then we need to move faster. Get there before he has time to prepare." Ayanna limped over, still holding the pistol. "I've never shot anyone," she admitted. "I wasn't sure I could pull the trigger if I had to." "You did well," Eli said. "Sometimes the threat is enough." They collected the weapon's valuable currency in the wilderness and continued on. But the mood had shifted. The encounter had shattered their illusion of invisibility. Hartley would know they were coming now. Whatever advantage of surprise they might have had was gone. They pushed hard through the afternoon, covering miles at a pace that had Ayanna gritting her teeth against the pain. But she never complained, never asked to slow down. She understood the urgency as well as any of them. As evening approached, they reached the edge of the valley and began climbing into the foothills that surrounded Fort Benton. Eli called a halt in a small cave he remembered from his scouting days, a place hidden from the main trails where they could rest without being seen. Inside the cave they built a small fire, keeping it low so the smoke would not be visible from a distance. Ayanna collapsed against the stone wall, exhausted. Kaya checked her sister's bandages, relief crossing her face when she found no fresh bleeding. "We should reach the fort by tomorrow afternoon," Eli said, studying the map by firelight. "But we can't just walk up to the gates. We need to scout it first. Find out where Hartley keeps his records, his correspondence. The proof we need will be in his office." "How do we get in without being caught?" Ayanna asked. "There's a drainage culvert on the east side of the fort. Runs under the wall, empties into a ravine. It's how I used to sneak in and out when I wanted to avoid the sentries. Should still be there unless they've blocked it off. And if they have, then we improvise." Kaya had been quiet, staring into the fire. When she spoke, her voice was troubled. "What if we find the proof and my father still won't listen? What if he's too far gone in his grief and anger to see reason?" It was the question they had all been avoiding. The possibility that even with evidence, even with truth on their side, they might not be able to stop what was coming. "Then we take the evidence to someone else," Eli said. "The territorial governor, a federal marshal, someone with the authority to investigate Hartley and shut down his operation. That could take months. My father could attack before then." "One problem at a time. First we get the proof, then we figure out how to use it." They ate a cold meal, not wanting to risk cooking and alerting anyone to their presence. As night fell, Eli took the first watch while the sisters tried to sleep, but he could hear them whispering in Apache, their voices low and worried. He understood their fear. They were so close now, close enough to touch their goal, but close also meant vulnerable, exposed. One mistake and everything would fall apart. Hours passed. The fire burned down to embers. Eli sat near the cave entrance watching the stars wheel overhead and thought about the choices that had brought him to this moment. Every decision, every fork in the road that had led him from respected scout to deserter to hermit to this. Sitting in a cave with two Apache women planning to break into a military fort and accuse his former commanding officer of treason. If someone had told him 6 days ago that this was where he would be, he would have thought them insane. But 6 days ago he had been a different man, broken and hollow and waiting to die. Now he had purpose, had a reason to keep breathing beyond simple biological imperative. He had people depending on him. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Kaya emerged from the darkness, moving to sit beside him. She had a blanket wrapped around her shoulders against the cold. "Can't sleep?" he asked quietly. "Too nervous. Tomorrow, everything changes." "Yes." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Kaya spoke again, her voice hesitant. "If this goes wrong, if we don't make it out of Fort Benton, I want you to know something." Eli turned to look at her, her face half in shadow. "I was wrong about you," she continued. "When I first recognized you, when I realized you were one of the soldiers from Black Creek, I thought you were beyond redemption. Thought all you deserved was death. But these past days, watching you with Ayanna, seeing how hard you try to be better than you were, I've realized something." "What's that?" "That hate is easy. Forgiveness is hard. And I've been choosing the easy path because it hurt less than admitting that maybe, just maybe, people can change." She looked at him directly now, her eyes catching the starlight. "You're not the same man who stood by at Black Creek. I can see that now. You're someone different, someone trying to atone, and I think my mother would have seen that too, would have told me to give you a chance." Eli felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been sealed shut for 3 years. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Don't deserve your mother's either." "Maybe not, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is that I'm choosing to give it anyway, choosing to believe that tomorrow matters more than yesterday." She reached out and took his hand, the same gesture he had made the night before. But this time, there was no hesitation, just warmth and connection, and the fragile beginning of something that might, given time, become trust. "If we die tomorrow," Kaya said softly, "I want to die knowing I chose to see the good in someone instead of just the bad, that I was brave enough to forgive. You're the bravest person I've ever met. I'm terrified. That's what makes it brave." They sat together, hands clasped, watching the night slowly give way to the gray light of pre-dawn. Inside the cave, Ayanna slept peacefully, trusting them to keep her safe. And in that moment, Eli made a silent promise. No matter what happened at Fort Benton, no matter what dangers they faced, he would protect these 2 women with everything he had, would give his life if necessary to make sure they survived. It was not about redemption anymore, not about easing his guilt or finding absolution. It was about protecting the people he had come to care for, the people who had given him back his humanity when he thought it was lost forever. Morning came too quickly. They broke camp in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The fort was only a few hours away now. By afternoon they would either have the evidence they needed or they would be dead. There was no middle ground, no safe retreat. They were committed now, locked into a course of action that would end in triumph or tragedy. As they began the final leg of their journey, the sun rose behind them, casting their shadows long across the snow. 3 figures moving toward destiny, toward danger, toward the moment when everything would be decided. Eli looked at Kaya, at Ayanna, and felt a surge of protective fierceness so strong it almost staggered him. These women had saved him, had pulled him out of the darkness and given him a reason to fight. Now it was his turn to save them, whatever the cost. The fort appeared on the horizon as they crested a ridge. Fort Benton, squat and utilitarian, sitting in the valley like a scar on the landscape. Smoke rose from its chimneys. Sentries walked the walls. It looked exactly as Eli remembered it. Home to the man who had ordered the massacre at Black Creek. Home to the man who was trying to start a war. And somewhere inside those walls was the proof that could stop it all. "Ready?" Eli asked. Kaya and Ayanna nodded, their faces set with determination. "Then let's finish this." They began the descent toward Fort Benton. 3 people against an army carrying nothing but courage and desperation and the faint, fragile hope that truth might actually matter. The Wolf's Moon had passed, but its legacy remained, and in the cold light of day redemption waited, or death. Only time would tell which. They waited until nightfall, hidden in the rocks above Fort Benton. From their vantage point, Eli could see the layout: clearly wooden walls reinforced with stone watchtowers at each corner, sentries making their rounds with predictable regularity. Nothing had changed in 3 years. Hartley ran a tight operation, but predictable was exploitable. "There," Eli whispered, pointing to the eastern wall. "See that dark opening near the ground? That's the drainage culvert. Guards change shifts in 20 minutes. That's our window." Kaya studied the fort through narrowed eyes. "And once we're inside, Hartley's office is in the main building's 2nd floor corner room. He keeps his records there, always did." Ayanna shifted her weight, testing her injured leg. "I'll slow you down. Maybe I should wait here." "No." Kaya's voice was firm. "We stay together. All 3 of us." "Then we move now," Eli said. "Stay low, stay quiet, and if something goes wrong, run. Don't wait for me." They descended as darkness deepened, 3 shadows flowing down the hillside. The culvert entrance was exactly where Eli remembered, partially hidden by scrub brush and shadow. He knelt, peering into the darkness. The metal grate that had once covered it was gone, rusted away or removed. A stroke of luck they desperately needed. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough to crawl through. Water trickled along the bottom, ice cold and foul-smelling. Eli went first, rifle slung across his back, pulling himself forward on his elbows. Behind him he could hear Kaya helping Ayanna, their breathing loud in the confined space. 50 feet, 100. The darkness was absolute. Eli counted the distance by memory, by the angle of the slope. When his hands found the iron ladder he knew led upward, relief flooded through him. "Here," he breathed. "Straight up. Opens into the storage building behind the stables." He climbed slowly, testing each rung. The trapdoor at the top was wooden, swollen with moisture. It took 3 hard shoves before it gave way with a crack that sounded deafening in the silence. Eli froze, listening. No shouts, no running feet, just the distant murmur of soldiers in the barracks and the whinny of horses. He pulled himself up into musty darkness. The storage room was filled with sacks of grain and barrels of salt pork, exactly as he remembered. Some things, it seemed, never changed. Kaya emerged next, then helped Ayanna up. The younger woman was breathing hard, her face pale with pain, but she made no sound of complaint. "This way," Eli whispered, moving to the door. He cracked it open, peering out into the fort's interior. Lanterns cast pools of yellow light across the parade ground. 2 soldiers stood talking near the armory, their backs to him. Perfect. They slipped out, keeping to the shadows, moving along the wall toward the main building. Every sound seemed magnified, every footstep a potential betrayal. But they reached the building's side door without incident. Eli tried the handle. Locked. He pulled a thin piece of metal from his boot, a lockpick he had made years ago and never thrown away. Old habits. His fingers worked the mechanism, feeling for the tumblers. Click, click, the lock gave. Inside, the building smelled of wood polish and tobacco smoke. A single lamp burned in the hallway, turned low. Eli led them to the stairs, wincing at every creak of the floorboards. Second floor, third door on the left. Hartley's office. The door was locked, but this lock was simpler. 30 seconds and they were inside. The room was neat, organized, everything in its place. A desk dominated the center, covered with papers and ledgers. A filing cabinet stood against one wall. Maps decorated the others, showing Apache territories, railroad routes, mineral deposits. The pieces of Hartley's puzzle laid out for anyone who knew how to read them. "Start looking," Eli said, moving to the desk. "Letters, invoices, anything that shows weapons shipments or payments from the railroad company." Kaya went to the filing cabinet. Ayanna limped to a shelf of ledgers. They worked in silence, the only sound the rustle of paper and their own breathing. Minutes passed. 5. 10. Eli was beginning to worry they would find nothing when Kaya made a small sound. "Here," she breathed. "Letters. From someone named Marcus Pemberton, vice president of the Montana Northern Railway Company." Eli moved to her side, reading over her shoulder by lamplight. The letters were damning. Promises of payment for facilitating land acquisition. References to removing the native obstacle. Amounts that made his blood run cold. $50,000, $100,000, enough to make a man rich, enough to make him a monster. "Keep looking," he said. "We need documentation of the weapons shipments, proof that links Hartley directly to arming the Apache." Ayanna found it in a locked drawer of the desk, the lock so simple she opened it with a hairpin. A ledger written in Hartley's own hand. Shipments of rifles, ammunition, dynamite. All marked as losses or stolen by hostiles, but the dates and quantities matched perfectly with what Kaya and Ayanna had found in the cave. "This is it," Eli said, his hands shaking as he held the evidence. "This proves everything, the conspiracy, the manipulation, all of it." "Then we should go," Kaya said urgently, "before someone—" The door slammed open. Captain William Hartley stood in the doorway, flanked by 4 armed soldiers. His uniform was immaculate as always, his mustache precisely trimmed. But his eyes held a madness Eli had seen before on that terrible day at Black Creek. "Thornton," Hartley said, his voice almost conversational. "I had hoped those trappers were mistaken, that my former scout had not become quite so predictable." Eli stepped in front of Kaya and Ayanna, shielding them. "It's over, Hartley. We have the proof, the letters, the ledgers, everything." "Do you?" Hartley smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. "And who will you show them to? The territorial governor who I dine with monthly, the federal marshal who owes me favors, the army command that promoted me based on my success at pacifying the frontier." He took a step into the room and the soldiers raised their rifles. "You were always naive, Thornton, always believing in justice, in doing the right thing. That's why you never advanced. Why you ran away like a coward after Black Creek. You couldn't understand that this is how the world works. The strong take what they want. The weak are ground beneath." "You're going to start a war," Eli said. "Kill hundreds of people. For what, money, land, for a railroad?" "For the future," Hartley said. "For progress. The Apache are a dying people clinging to land they cannot properly use. The railroad will bring civilization, commerce, growth. I'm simply accelerating the inevitable and getting wealthy in the process." He gestured to the soldiers. "Kill them, all 3. Make it look like the Apache broke in to steal weapons. It will only hasten the war I've been planning." The soldiers advanced, rifles leveled. Eli's hand went to his knife, knowing it was futile but unable to simply surrender. He would die fighting, would give Kaya and Ayanna every second he could. Then the window exploded inward. Chief Dakota came through in a shower of glass, followed by 6 Apache warriors. They moved like shadows, given form, fast and utterly silent. Before the soldiers could react, 2 were down, tomahawks buried in their skulls. The others spun, firing wildly. Chaos erupted. Eli tackled Hartley, driving him to the ground. The captain was stronger than he looked, twisting, bringing a knife up from his boot. The blade scored across Eli's ribs a line of fire that made him gasp. Across the room, Kaya had grabbed a fallen rifle and was using it as a club, protecting Ayanna, who cowered against the wall. The soldiers were no match for the Apache warriors in close quarters. It was Black Creek, in reverse, savage and sudden, and utterly one-sided. Hartley shoved Eli off, scrambling to his feet. He lunged for the desk, grabbing a pistol from the drawer, swung it toward Kaya. "If I'm going down," he snarled, "I'm taking one of you red—" Eli threw himself between Hartley and Kaya. The pistol fired deafening in the small room. Impact struck Eli's shoulder, spinning him around. He hit the floor hard, his vision whiting out with pain. Through the haze, he saw Chief Dakota cross the room in 3 strides, saw the war club rise and fall, heard the wet crack of Hartley's skull breaking. Then darkness pulled him down. He woke to hands on his face, someone calling his name. "Kaya," her voice frantic, terrified. He forced his eyes open, found her leaning over him, tears streaming down her face. "Don't die," she was saying. "Please don't die. You don't get to do this. You don't get to save me and then leave." "Not planning to," Eli managed. His shoulder felt like it was on fire, but he was alive. "Did we get them?" "All dead or captured," a deep voice said. Chief Dakota appeared in his vision, a tall man with iron-gray hair and eyes that held both strength and sorrow. "My warriors control the fort. The soldiers surrendered when they saw their captain fall. The evidence. Safe. My daughters showed me everything." Dakota's expression was unreadable. "You were right. I was being used, manipulated into a war that would have destroyed my people." He knelt beside Eli, studying him with those penetrating eyes. "You are the soldier from Black Creek, the one who stood by while my wife was murdered." It was not a question. Eli met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away even though he expected death. "Yes. Yet you saved my daughters. Twice. Once from wolves, once from this conspiracy." "I tried to do better than I was." Dakota was silent for a long moment. Then he placed a hand on Eli's uninjured shoulder. "My wife used to say that a man is not defined by his worst moment, but by what he does with all the moments after. You have tried to atone. That is more than most would do." He stood, gesturing to his warriors. "Bind his wound. He lives, and when he heals, he will be welcome in my lodge as a friend of my people." The warriors moved to help, but Kaya pushed them aside. "I'll do it," she said fiercely. "He's mine to care for." As she worked tearing cloth for bandages, pressing against the wound to stop the bleeding, Eli caught her hand. "Thank you," he whispered, "for giving me a chance." "Thank you for being worth it," she replied, and kissed him. The world spun, but not from blood loss this time. From something else entirely. Something that felt almost like hope. 6 months later, Eli stood outside a new cabin, this one built at the edge of Apache territory. A compromise between worlds, between past and future. He was no longer a hermit, no longer running. The evidence they had seized from Hartley's office had been enough. A federal investigation had revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. The railroad company executives were facing trial. The Apache had been granted protections for their land. A fragile peace had been brokered, one that might actually hold. Eli heard footsteps behind him, turned to find Kaya approaching, her hair loose around her shoulders, a smile on her face. "Ayanna wants to know if you're coming to dinner. She's made enough food for 20 people. Your sister still thinks I need fattening up." "You do. You're too skinny for a man who's supposed to protect me." She moved into his arms, fitting against him like she had been made for that exact purpose. They stood together, watching the sun set over the valley, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink, beautiful and peaceful and alive with possibility. "Do you still dream about Black Creek?" Kaya asked softly. Eli thought about it. The nightmares still came sometimes, but they were gentler now, the ghosts quieter, as if they had finally given him permission to heal. "Less often," he said. Now I dream about the future instead. What do you see? You, me, a life spent trying to build bridges instead of burning them. It's not redemption. Not really. But it's something. It's enough, Kaya said, and pulled him down for another kiss. Above them, stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. The moon would rise soon, full and bright. Not the wolf's moon anymore. That cycle had passed, taking the old Eli with it. This was something new. A different moon for a different man. One who had learned that the past could not be changed, but the future was still being written. That forgiveness was possible even when it seemed impossible. That love could grow in the space between hatred and hope. Somewhere in the distance a wolf howled, but it was not hunting now, just singing to the night wild and free. Eli smiled and led Kaya inside toward warmth and family and the life he had never thought he would deserve. The hermit of Copper Ridge was dead. The man who remained was learning how to live, and that he thought as he sat down to dinner with the people who had saved him was more than enough. It was everything. The end.